The first thing I remember is the cold, sharp and unforgiving, filling every corner of my lungs like ice water. I didn't imagine struggling to drag myself out of the lake alone, shivering, shaking, desperate for air that seemed just out of reach. I didn't imagine the way their voices lingered afterward, low and cruel as if mocking every beat of my heart. I didn't imagine this, I whispered to myself, trembling. And yet I was here alive, somehow. That was enough. When the police arrived, the young officer looked at me, hesitation written all over his face. "Do you feel safe here, ma'am?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. I looked around the house at the walls that had held both memories and shadows, and I nodded. Yes, now I do. The clipboard in his hands moved silently, scribbling notes that would carry my truth beyond this house, beyond me. The sergeant lingered at the doorway for a moment, eyes heavy with understanding. "Mrs. Caldwell, whatever happens next, you've done the right thing." His words weren't comfort, not really. They were acknowledgement, a small torch in a dark room. I didn't do it for righteousness. I did it because they left me no choice. That was the plain, unflinching truth. The officers walked to their cruiser. When the door clicked and the engine hummed to life, the house sank into a different kind of silence. Not hollow, not fearful, waiting, patient. I poured myself another cup of tea, letting the warm liquid fill my hands, noticing how it didn't taste bitter this time. Around noon, the phone rang. I braced myself for Wendy's voice, panic, tears, excuses, but it wasn't her. It was Daniel. "They picked up the footage," he said. "The officers called me just now. A formal investigation will open by the end of the day." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I already knew how it would unfold. Amora, once this starts, they'll scramble. They'll lie. Every excuse, every apology, every carefully rehearsed story. I was ready for it. I had been ready the moment they walked away from that dock. I could hear the pause on the other end of the line, silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just full. Then he said, "I'll stay ahead of it." Full of that quiet, unshakable certainty, Daniel always did. I returned to my armchair, hands resting on my knees. The sunlight cut through the window in a thin strip, muted gold across the rug, and for the first time in weeks I noticed it without dread. The thing that struck me wasn't fear, it was its absence. Nor was there grief. Perhaps grief had burned itself out on that dock in that moment when I had seen the truth etched in their retreating shoulders. Whatever would come next, arrests, hearings, lawyers, broken ties, would be consequences earned. Revenge wasn't necessary, truth was enough. And truth had feet now. A badge. A file number. It was moving forward. The investigation unfolded faster than I anticipated, maybe because small towns remember everything. Maybe because the officers saw my face and understood more than words could ever convey. Or maybe it was simply that the footage spoke louder than any trembling voice. 2 days later, a cruiser returned to my house. This time, it didn't slip in quietly. From my window, I saw Grant standing on the lawn, hands cuffed, arrogance stripped away, forced to look at the ground he once claimed as his own. Shame does that. Forces a man to shrink to fit the consequences of his actions. Milo was taken an hour later. He had run, Daniel said, but only for a little while. Running had always been his instinct. Standing still was a lesson he had never learned. Wendy wasn't arrested. She hadn't physically touched me. Her sin was silence, a wound that didn't fit in legal boxes, but one I had felt deep in my bones. Yet that afternoon she came to my door. Small, pale, fragile, her eyes red, mascara smudged, hair disheveled. She looked like a child who had just realized the world had grown too big, too sharp, too cold. "Mom," she whispered, voice barely audible. I stepped aside. She entered cautiously, as if every step might break something fragile inside her. In the living room, she hovered near the armchair, feet unsure, shoulders folded inward before finally lowering herself into it. She carried the weight of what happened with her, though I didn't think her voice would crack when she spoke. "He said it was just pressure, that maybe scaring me a little would make things easier, that we needed to talk to you." I watched her swallow, trembling. "You knew enough," I said softly, not sharp, just truth. Fear and loss had pushed her into silence, but they could not rewrite reality. "I was afraid of him. I know, and afraid of losing everything." I nodded. Fear didn't excuse actions, and it didn't erase choice. She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "I didn't come to defend myself, Her words trailed off. She had come to see if I hated her. Hate. The word felt heavy, impossible. "No," I said, "I don't hate you." Her shoulders shook, tears dripping silently onto her hands. "I want to fix things," she whispered, small and fragile. I leaned forward. "Start by standing on your own feet, not mine." Her nod was tentative, fearful, but honest. Honesty, even late, is still honesty. When she left, the house held a momentary weight, but it was different. Aftermath, not betrayal. The edges of consequence, not the drowning fear of yesterday. That evening, Daniel called again. Charges were filed. "Your testimony won't be needed until next week," he said. "Good," I replied. "And Amora, everything is secure just as you asked." I exhaled, relief pure and clean. I closed my eyes for a moment. The house was silent. Outside, the street lights flickered on. Things were falling apart, relationships, illusions, lies, but I wasn't breaking. For the first time in years, I was standing. The days after the arrests unfolded in a strange, almost surreal quiet. Not the hollow, suffocating silence that had once lingered in every corner of my house, but a calm, almost clear kind of stillness. I woke each morning without holding my breath, without bracing for the inevitable betrayal that had once defined my life. It was a small miracle, almost imperceptible, yet transformative. I spent those first days in the ordinary, tending to the remnants of a life I had held too tightly. Laundry, sorting through letters yellowed with age, trimming the dead branches from the rose bushes that had survived winters harsher than my own fear. My body ached, not with terror, but with the familiar wear of age and weather, a comforting ache that reminded me I was alive, unbroken. Daniel called often, more than reason might demand, but I understood. Some check on you because the law requires it, others because they remember the person you once were before life began carving bruises into your spirit. He fell squarely into the second category. On Thursday, his words lingered in my mind. "Ira, you don't have to stay in that house forever. You can start over even now, start over at 78. I had laughed, a quiet, private sound, but the idea didn't slip away. It settled in unbidden and refused to leave. That night I sat by the window, watching the yard under the soft glow of the moon. The maple tree had thinned, the porch paint chipped and peeling. This house had carried me through grief, through solitude, through quiet betrayals disguised as concern. Perhaps it had done its work. Perhaps I had done mine. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove toward the coast, toward the idea of freedom that had taken root in my chest. The cottage I found wasn't new nor pristine. White paint chipped at the corners, the air filled with the mingling scent of pine and sea salt. It sat a few streets from the shoreline, modest, quiet, patient. The owner, a widower about my age, looked at me with surprise. "You're sure? Most folks your age want something closer to town." "I've spent enough years close to things," I said. "I want a little distance, a little space from it all." I stepped inside. The floors creaked beneath my feet and the light fell softly, almost reverently across every surface. There was no history here but the sea, no shadows lurking in corners, no footsteps with malice, just space. For the first time in decades, space felt like freedom. I didn't sign anything that day. I sat on the small porch, listening to the waves. They moved with a patience I envied, rolling in and out with no need for permission, no demand for attention. Water doesn't lie. It tells the truth in every ripple and curl. Driving home, I let the idea take root, the hope settling like seeds in fertile soil. The next few days were a flurry of quiet decisions. I told Daniel to prepare the papers, visited the cottage again, standing on the porch to watch the gulls trace circles over the ocean, thinking of my husband, not the young man in the photographs, but the one I carried in memory. Gentle, stubborn, patient, worn by the years yet unyielding in the ways that mattered. He would have liked this place. He would have stood beside me, arm around my shoulders, and said, "This feels right, Em," and it did. It felt right. On the day I signed the papers, Lillian drove me. She didn't ask questions, only held my hand when the keys were placed in my palm. "You sure?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "This is mine." Back at home, I packed slowly, methodically. A few books, photographs, my husband's watch, the quilt, the teapot that had survived every decade of my life. The rest remained behind, left for the house to hold. I didn't need to carry it all. The night before the movers arrived, I sat alone in the living room. The walls looked stark, bare, honest without their usual clutter. I let my fingers trace the arm of the chair, the same one I had sat in the night after the lake. It was strange how swiftly a life could pivot, how decisively a woman could claim herself once she remembered her worth. I wasn't fleeing. I was moving toward a place where footsteps wouldn't sneak down the hall with greed-soaked intentions, where no hand would push me toward darkness, where silence didn't carry unspoken debts. A place where I could belong to myself. That night I slept, deeply, fully, untroubled. For the first time in decades, I slept knowing I had decided that my life would no longer hurt. The cottage greeted me with a quiet pulse, a presence I could almost feel when I stood still enough. Windows wide, wind from the sea moving through the rooms, curtains fluttering like hands beckoning me forward. The air smelled of salt, pine, and new beginnings. I carried my first box into the kitchen and unpacked the teapot first. Some things stay because they deserve to. I placed it on the stove, turned on the kettle, and leaned against the counter, breathing in the simplicity, the honesty, the start of a life unclaimed by fear. There were no raised voices, no waiting for doors to slam, just the steady rhythm of the ocean. Later, a soft knock on the porch. Lillian appeared, groceries in hand, smiling as she wandered the small living room, taking in the mismatched furniture, faded rug, and chipped shelves. "Feels like a place where someone can breathe," she said. "It is," I replied. She hugged me, a long, quiet hug, asking nothing, expecting nothing. When she left, I stepped onto the porch, watching the sky blush into evening, the wind brushing against my face, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. I sipped my tea, walked the narrow path to the beach, felt the cool sand under my shoes, the waves brushing softly at the shore, smoothing the edges of the world. My body ached, yes, but with life, not fear. Grant and Milo awaited hearings. Wendy had visited quietly twice, speaking little and listening much. I made no promises of reconciliation, nor did I close the door entirely. Some wounds, some people need time. As for me, I had no more battles left, only days to live slowly, freely. I craved peace, not victory, and peace at last seemed within reach. I sipped my tea, watching the horizon where sea met sky, thinking of all the versions of myself: wife, mother, caretaker, forgiver, survivor. Now I was simply a woman claiming her quiet dignity, sitting by the water. The lake had tried to take me, nearly succeeded, but I had emerged with more than breath. I had emerged with a future. Waves curled closer, then slipped away, patient and steady. I was not afraid to be alone. I was not afraid to start over. I was not afraid of who I had become. I was grateful for clarity, for truth, for the strength that age grants when youth can no longer pretend to help. Tea finished, sand brushed from my hands, horizon glowing faintly, promising. Before stepping back up the path, I whispered to the wind, more to myself than any other soul. "You are allowed to choose yourself, no matter how late. Don't wait for someone to push you into the deep water. Choose yourself while you're still standing." The days at the cottage settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I craved. The steady pulse of the ocean outside my window became a heartbeat I could follow, grounding me in ways I hadn't realized I needed. Mornings began with tea, the steam curling into the salt-tinged air as gulls traced lazy circles overhead. I walked along the beach, letting the cold water lap at my ankles, each wave washing away traces of fear, of betrayal, of old grief. The town nearby was quiet, accommodating, almost respectful of a woman who had arrived with no fanfare and demanded nothing but space. Daniel called frequently, updates on hearings, court dates, and paperwork. His voice was calm, deliberate, careful with information that could unsettle me if delivered carelessly. I found myself smiling more than I had in years. Small things, a gull gliding close, the wind catching my hair just right, a neighbor's wave, felt like victories. Not dramatic, not loud, but profoundly personal. I had survived everything they had thrown at me, and now ordinary beauty felt like triumph. Grant and Milo's hearings came and went. I didn't attend the sessions in person. I didn't need the theater of anger or confrontation. I had done my part. I had testified when it mattered, and the law took over from there. From the snippets Daniel shared, Grant looked diminished, humbled by consequences he had never anticipated. Milo ran when confronted, but his escape was brief. The law caught up, as it always does, and I knew neither would find the satisfaction of evading justice. Wendy visited twice, cautious, pale, and small, her presence more about seeking closure than reconciliation. She said little, listened a great deal, and left in the same careful way she had arrived. Some wounds are too deep to force open, some apologies too late to untangle, and yet in her silence I saw a tiny spark of understanding, a recognition of wrongs that could not be erased. I didn't forgive her, not fully, but I didn't condemn her either. That part of my life had passed beyond my control. The cottage became my sanctuary, my classroom for rediscovering who I was apart from the shadow of fear. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. The teapot first, the quilt, books, photographs. Each item was a marker of continuity, of survival. The rest remained in boxes, waiting, irrelevant, as if the house itself could keep the memory of past horrors without my constant attention. The small kitchen smelled of pine and salt. Simple meals reminded me that life did not demand drama, only consistency. I spent afternoons walking along the shoreline, watching the gulls wheel overhead, feeling the wet sand mold beneath my feet. With each step, the weight of old betrayals lightened. I breathed more freely than I had in decades, aware that the only battles I needed to fight were the ones that belonged to me. Daniel's calls became less about urgency and more about companionship, a reminder that some people carry your past with respect without judgment. One afternoon, standing at the edge of the water, I thought of my husband, the man I loved, not the younger version in photographs, but the memory of him who had stood steadfast beside me through smaller trials. He would have liked this. He would have marveled at the resilience, the sheer stubbornness of survival. I could hear his quiet approval in my mind, and it steadied me. Nights at the cottage were different, too. The air hummed with salt and old pine, the wind tracing patterns on the floors. No footsteps to fear, no shadows with hidden malice. The quiet was full, alive with the rhythm of the waves. I sipped tea by the window, listening to the gentle crash of surf, feeling the ache in my bones as the ache of life lived, not of fear endured. There was freedom in that ache. It reminded me that I had endured, that I had claimed myself despite years of threat and silence. The horizon seemed to stretch infinitely, as if promising endless possibilities, each wave a reminder that life moves, always forward, never back. I no longer feared the solitude. I welcomed it. The days blurred into weeks, but each carried its own quiet victories. I learned to notice the little things. The call of a gull, the way sunlight glinted across the waves, the warmth of a cup of tea between my hands. Each ordinary moment became extraordinary because I had been denied them for so long. The night the moon rose full and silver, I stood on the porch, feeling the wind press against my face, brushing my hair back, thinking of all I had lost and all I had gained. The house I had left behind could keep its memories. I had claimed my own. No one could take from me what I had fought to regain: peace, clarity, and a future entirely mine. When I closed my eyes that night, I slept the way a woman sleeps after surviving the unthinkable, calm, deep, untroubled. The next morning, the sun rose over the water, painting the waves in liquid gold. I walked the beach barefoot, feeling the grit of sand between my toes, letting the wind tug at my hair, the sun warming my back. Every sensation reminded me that I was alive, truly alive, for the first time in decades. Life was no longer a battle for survival. It was a canvas I could paint, a rhythm I could follow, a quiet dignity I could claim. I thought of the lake, of the dark water, of the fear that had once gripped me so tightly it ached in my bones. I had walked out of that water with more than breath. I had walked out with my life, with my freedom, with myself restored. Every wave that rolled to shore whispered that truth, steady and patient. I did not need vengeance. I did not need to chase the shadows of the past. The law had done its work, the world had adjusted, and I had emerged intact, whole, undeniable. Peace, I realized, was not something granted. It was something seized, claimed with the quiet strength that comes from having survived and refused to bow. And as the gulls traced wide, lazy circles over the ocean, I knew I would never again surrender to fear. I had chosen myself, and in choosing myself, I had claimed everything that truly mattered. The mornings at the cottage carried a strange, delicate kind of peace, one that had nothing to do with quiet towns or empty streets, and everything to do with reclaiming what had been taken. Sunlight poured through the open windows, spilling over the worn wooden floors, warming the small rooms in gold that felt almost sacred. I held my tea, letting it seep into me, warmth spreading slowly like reassurance through each bone and muscle, reminding me I had survived, that I belonged to myself again. Outside, the wind rolled in from the ocean, carrying the scent of salt and pine, brushing past my face like a hand that had been waiting years to comfort me, whispering promises of calm I hadn't dared imagine. The days unfolded slowly. Daniel called with updates, voice steady and clinical, detailing hearings and timelines. Grant and Milo were both moving through the legal system, but I didn't need to sit in a courtroom, didn't need to watch the unraveling of people who had once held power over me. I had already walked through fear, and nothing could touch me now. Each day I stepped onto the porch and let the sea greet me, its waves curling around my ankles, urging me forward, telling me without words that life did not wait, and neither should I, even the simplest actions. Arranging books, unpacking old letters, brewing tea, felt like victories. Ordinary things became monumental when they were done for yourself, without watching eyes or whispered judgments. I had spent decades living in the shadows of others' expectations and manipulations. Now, every breath was mine, every choice mine, every movement mine, unchallenged and unburdened. Wendy visited twice in the week following the arrests. Each visit was careful, almost fragile. She spoke little, listened more, and left with a weight of unsaid words suspended in the air, a bridge neither of us knew if we could cross. I didn't hold her accountable for everything, but I didn't forgive indiscriminately either. Some bridges are meant to be crossed slowly, some perhaps never. I watched her leave and felt a strange calm, a recognition that she was learning the cost of silence, the burden it leaves behind, and I had carried enough of that for a lifetime. The tides became my rhythm, each wave brushing the shore like it was reminding me that life moves relentlessly forward, regardless of what has been lost or betrayed. I walked barefoot along the sand, letting it shift beneath me, imprinting small, fragile markers of presence, proof that I existed and survived. The aches in my body no longer whispered fear. They spoke of endurance, of living through decades of storms, of grief, of people who had tried to define my limits. Now they were familiar, ordinary aches, proof of life lived fully, scars softened into muscle memory. The nights were gentler than I could remember. Moonlight spread across the floorboards, silvered and calm, the ocean breathing in slow, rhythmic waves outside my windows. I could lie awake without imagining footsteps creeping in, without doors slamming in warning, without the oppressive shadow of someone waiting to control me. Sleep returned in deep waves, unbroken and restful, the kind that fills your chest with light instead of dread. One evening, Lillian came with groceries, smiling gently as she stepped inside. She didn't demand explanations or apologies. She simply acknowledged the life I had begun to reclaim with her quiet presence. We drank tea together in the living room, the sound of the ocean our only accompaniment. Her words were few, but they carried the understanding that some battles are private, some victories are silent, and some losses teach lessons only time can echo. I didn't need validation from her or anyone. The waves were enough. They reminded me that the ocean moves on, patient, ceaseless, just as life does. My world, once defined by betrayal and fear, had contracted and stretched and redefined itself. Each day was deliberate, careful, intentional. I learned to notice the small miracles. A gull tracing lazy circles over the surf, a sunbeam landing perfectly across my teacup, the smell of salt air filling my lungs. These were my treasures now, the proofs that the world could still be tender and kind in small doses, that it could nurture rather than consume. I thought of my husband often, not with longing or sorrow, but in quiet acknowledgement of love survived and remembered. He had been gentle and stubborn in ways that mattered, steady in ways the world had tried to erode in me. I imagined him beside me on the porch, arm around my shoulders, murmuring approval, and in that imagined presence, the cottage became more than a shelter. It became a declaration that life was still mine to inhabit, unshaken. The lake, once a threat to my body, my mind, my certainty, felt distant now. It had tried to claim me, but I had emerged not only alive, but resolute, unbroken, and unapologetically whole. The wind pushed against my hair, the waves kissed the sand, and each small, steady rhythm of the sea reinforced a truth that had taken years to reclaim. I belonged to myself. The cottage became my sanctuary, each day a reaffirmation that I could survive the world, survive myself, and emerge with dignity intact. Daniel called late one evening, voice calm, almost ceremonial. "Everything is secure. Nothing can touch you." I smiled, leaning against the doorframe, watching the moonlight sparkle across the rippling sea. "Thank you," I said softly, knowing it wasn't gratitude for safety. It was acknowledgement that my life had been claimed back, that I had taken what was mine. Seasons shifted gently. The maple shed its leaves, and the wind carried them across the sand like time itself marking my endurance. Even decay carried beauty now, even endings had shape. I could witness them without fear. Each day at the shore, each careful moment of living became a declaration. I survived. I existed. I was enough. Every wave that lapped my feet repeated the same truth. You survived. You belong to yourself. You are enough. And for the first time in decades, I believed it without hesitation, without fear, without apology. The mornings began to stretch longer, soft and deliberate, as if the world itself was granting me time to breathe, to exist without interference. I poured my tea into the chipped cup, letting the warmth seep into my fingers before lifting it to my lips. The taste was simple, unremarkable, yet somehow it carried weight. It reminded me that I was allowed small pleasures, small victories, small freedoms, each one a stitch in the fabric of the life I was rebuilding. The sea outside remained constant, waves rolling in steady, relentless rhythms. They didn't ask for apologies, explanations, or attention. They simply existed, as did I, and it was enough. Every morning I walked to the beach barefoot, feeling the sand shift beneath my feet, grounding me, reminding me that I had emerged from fear and silence and despair into something tangible, something mine. Each footprint was a declaration. I survived. I am here. I am whole. Daniel called often, his voice a tether to the world beyond the cottage, practical, precise, but not intrusive. He reported hearings, small legal victories, and procedural steps taken to ensure that nothing from the past could reach me. The names Grant and Milo surfaced in conversation, weightless yet significant, the tide of justice moving without my intervention. Wendy remained in the background, her appearances quiet, her words measured, almost shy. I watched her from a distance during her visits, noting the tremor in her hands, the softness in her gaze, and understood that some lessons aren't learned in the courts, but in the quiet observation of consequences. She came not for absolution, but for acknowledgement, a fragile human need I did not deny, but did not feed either. I did not need her penance to validate my survival. I simply needed to see that the world could right itself, slowly, as it always had when the weight of truth was finally allowed to speak. Days blurred, not into monotony, but into a rhythm that was comforting precisely because it was predictable. I arranged my books on the shelves, sorted letters and photographs, each item a fragment of a life I had lived, a life I still owned. I brewed tea in the mornings and evenings, the steam curling upward, carrying away old tension, old fears. Each cup was an affirmation, an anchor to the present, a signal to myself that I could exist without fear of intrusion, without the shadow of malevolence lurking in familiar corners. I walked through the cottage slowly, learning its quirks, its imperfections, and began to see beauty in its flaws. The chipped paint, the uneven floorboards, the slight must of old pine, all of it whispered that perfection was unnecessary, and that survival, truth, and clarity were rewards far greater than any veneer of order the world had once demanded of me. One evening, the wind carried the scent of rain and salt together, sharp and sweet. I stepped onto the porch to watch clouds swirl over the horizon, tracing their shapes as though the sky itself was rearranging the past. In that movement, I felt a kinship with change. It did not wait for consent. It simply moved. And so did I. I began keeping a journal, filling pages with small observations, thoughts, memories, and reflections. Some entries were sharp, unflinching accounts of fear and betrayal. Others were quiet, contemplative notes about the way the sun touched the sand, how gulls traced lazy arcs in the sky, or how the tea tasted sweeter when shared in silent company with the sea. Writing became ritual, a way to witness the evolution of a life once constrained, now free. I thought often of the lake, still in the distance, its waters reflecting the sky, a mirror of trials endured and fears confronted. It had tried to claim me, yet I had emerged unbroken, carrying not just breath, but clarity, not just life, but ownership of it. My body ached at times, not from trauma, but from living fully, from exertion and age and motion. I welcomed the ache, for it reminded me that my life was active, tangible, and mine to claim. The nights were different now. No shadows lurked beyond the windows. No imagined footsteps haunted the hallways. The moonlight streamed across the floors, soft and uninterrupted. Sleep came in deep waves, unbroken and restorative. Even dreams carried a gentleness I hadn't known in decades. I watched the ocean from my bedroom window, the waves glowing faintly under the moonlight, and felt the pulse of continuity. Life continued, and I was part of it, unthreatened, unbound by the fears that had once defined me. Lillian visited often, sometimes for tea, sometimes to sit quietly beside me and read, her presence a gentle affirmation that companionship need not be complicated or fraught. Our conversations were measured, thoughtful, unpressured, and I learned that connection did not require surrender, just acknowledgement of shared humanity. Slowly, I began to take walks beyond the immediate shore, exploring streets that wound between small cottages and shops, places that felt almost frozen in time, untouched by the greed and malice I had escaped. I noticed details I had once overlooked: the curve of a tree branch, the soft rustle of leaves, the sound of distant children playing. Life had texture and depth, and I could immerse myself in it without fear. Each day became a lesson in trust: trust in myself, trust in the rhythm of my own heart, trust in the world's ability to continue without tearing me apart. I learned that peace was not passive. It was deliberate, cultivated through attention, presence, and refusal to allow old patterns of fear to reclaim space in my mind or body. I tended the small garden beside the cottage, trimming the rose bushes, watching green shoots emerge from earth I had prepared. It mirrored my own regeneration. Each new leaf, each small bloom, became a symbol that life could persist, even after trauma, even after betrayal. Daniel's calls became less about protection and more about affirmation, updates delivered with a calm reassurance that the legal and practical world had aligned in my favor. Grant and Milo awaited their hearings. Wendy learned lessons in silence and consequence, and yet none of it reached me directly anymore. I was observing, existing, breathing free. One morning, I took a long walk along the cliff that overlooked the sea, the wind whipping against my face, invigorating, reminding me that I was alive. The horizon stretched endlessly, promising both uncertainty and possibility. I felt no fear. I felt no doubt, only certainty that this life, fragile and precious, was mine to inhabit fully. I realized then that I had spent decades defining my existence through others, through expectations, manipulations, fear, and now, finally, I existed for myself alone. Each wave, each gust of wind, each creak of the cottage floorboards was a reminder that I was present, that I had agency, and that the past no longer had dominion over me. The sunsets became my rituals, a daily surrender to beauty and impermanence, teaching me that endings could be gentle, transitions could be freeing, and life could be lived with clarity, without malice or fear intruding. In that moment, I understood that survival had always been more than breath. It was reclamation, assertion, and recognition that my life, my choices, my body, and my mind were my own. And for the first time in decades, I didn't just exist. I thrived. The days blurred into a soft rhythm, a pattern of small actions that became profound in their simplicity. I woke with the light spilling through the windows, the sound of waves against the shore carrying a kind of constancy I had never known. Tea in hand, I walked barefoot along the sand, letting the cool grains shift beneath me, massaging my feet in the quiet of early morning. Each footprint was a reminder. I survived, I endured, I reclaimed my life. Daniel's calls were now less urgent, more like the voice of a watchful friend than a protector. He updated me on hearings and procedures, the legal wheels grinding steadily toward justice, but he never rushed me, never reminded me of fear. I realized I had grown into a space where I could observe life without being consumed by it. The ocean mirrored that, rolling in and out, indifferent yet comforting. I began to notice small things: the curve of a gull's flight, the way sunlight shimmered on wet sand, the scent of salt and pine mingling with the cool morning air. These details became my anchors, tethering me to reality in a way I had long forgotten. Wendy's visits continued sporadically, each one a careful negotiation of presence and distance. She spoke little, listened more, and when she left, I felt neither relief nor resentment, only a quiet acknowledgement that some wounds could not be rushed, that trust had its own pace. I did not need her absolution. I only needed her to recognize that consequences exist beyond words and gestures. My body, once heavy with fear and tension, began to feel lighter. Movement became a pleasure rather than a caution. I stretched in the mornings, felt the ache in my joints, welcomed it as a reminder that I was alive and moving under my own power. I pruned the small garden by the cottage, watched green shoots emerge from soil I had tended, each new leaf a testament to resilience and care. I arranged furniture, unpacked boxes, and slowly the space began to feel like a sanctuary. It wasn't perfection, but it was honest, and honesty had a weight and clarity that comforted me more than any polished facade ever could. Nights brought the kind of sleep I hadn't known in years. No shadows lurked, no imagined hands pressed me into water, no whispers haunted the corners. The moon cast gentle silver light across the floorboards, and I let it wash over me, sinking into bed with a body relaxed and a mind untroubled. Dreams were soft, almost mundane, but in their simplicity lay a profound truth. I was free. The past could no longer touch me, and that liberation was a power I could feel in the bones of my hands, the curve of my spine, the rhythm of my heart. I explored the village slowly, intentionally. Streets lined with small shops, cottages, and gardens that seemed untouched by time became part of my landscape. I noticed the details, the way light filtered through trees, the hum of distant conversation, the subtle changes in seasons brushing over the town. Life carried on here at its own pace, and I could step into it fully, without fear, without expectation, without the weight of old betrayals pressing on my chest. Lillian's visits became a quiet delight. She wandered through the rooms, commenting on small details, helping arrange furniture, or simply sitting beside me with a book in hand. Our conversations were light but meaningful, a reminder that companionship could be gentle, supportive, and uncomplicated. We shared tea, sometimes silence, sometimes laughter, and each interaction affirmed that connection did not require surrender. The legal proceedings moved forward, but I observed them at a distance. Grant and Milo faced their hearings, their arrogance replaced with the weight of consequence, and I felt only a quiet satisfaction that justice had its due. Wendy's path remained hers to navigate, and I no longer needed to intervene. My role in the story was concluded. I was a witness, a survivor, not a participant in the drama of others' reckoning. I spent afternoons walking along cliffs, feeling the wind whip against my face, invigorating, sharp, alive. The horizon stretched endlessly, promising both uncertainty and possibility. I did not fear the unknown. I embraced it. I understood that life was not defined by what others did to us, but by how we chose to live afterward. I journaled regularly, documenting observations, emotions, reflections. Some entries were raw, recounting moments of fear, betrayal, and survival. Others were quiet meditations. The way gulls traced arcs in the sky, how the waves whispered against the shore, how the tea tasted when sipped slowly, deliberately. Writing became ritual, a way to bear witness to my own life, to my own reclamation, to the clarity that comes from living for oneself alone. The ocean taught me patience, constancy, and the inevitability of movement. I watched tides, storms, and calm afternoons, recognizing that life's rhythms were inevitable and unstoppable, and that I could be both present and at ease within them. My body and mind adapted, healed. Pain from past years existed only as a faint memory, not a tether. My muscles remembered tension and fear, but they also remembered strength, endurance, and the capacity to carry myself forward. Each movement became a celebration, each breath a declaration of survival and autonomy. Sunsets became sacred rituals. I watched the sky bleed into shades of rose, gold, and indigo, feeling a gentle surrender in the beauty of impermanence. Endings did not terrify me. They invited reflection and growth. I understood finally that life's most profound lessons often arrive disguised as closure. I tended the garden carefully, each rose bush pruned with attention, each seed nurtured into bloom, a symbol of life persisting despite neglect, harm, or harsh conditions. In these small acts, I saw my own resilience mirrored, and I felt gratitude for the simple, tangible affirmation that growth is always possible, even after trauma. Slowly, the cottage became a home, not just a structure, but a sanctuary. Its imperfections spoke truth, its silence was restorative, and the presence of nature around it offered constant reassurance that I was safe, grounded, and complete. The sea, always present, became a companion and teacher, reminding me of continuity, strength, and the unbroken rhythm of life. I realized that I had spent decades living in reaction, reacting to fear, betrayal, and expectation. And now, for the first time, I lived in deliberate action, choosing each step, each thought, each breath with intention and clarity. I did not seek revenge, I did not crave recognition, I only claimed peace, and in doing so discovered that it was more potent and fulfilling than any victory or validation the world could offer. Each wave that touched the shore whispered the same truth. You are here, you are whole, you are free. I listened. I understood. I thrived. Days passed in a soft cadence, each one marked by quiet victories I never thought I'd claim. I woke with the first light, walking barefoot on the sand, letting the ocean's rhythm settle inside me like a meditation I hadn't known I needed. I brewed tea slowly, savoring the warmth, feeling my hands steady and my chest expand with each sip. Life had stopped being a threat and became a canvas I could touch, shape, and inhabit fully. Wendy's visits remained cautious. She lingered at the edge of rooms, spoke softly, and left without seeking absolution or demanding attention. I observed her, noting the fragility that had once hidden behind her silence. She carried guilt like a shadow, but shadows shrink when you stop feeding them fear. I offered her nothing but presence and honesty, letting her navigate her own path. The hearings for Grant and Milo continued without my interference. I no longer felt the weight of their judgment pressing on me. It was a matter of process, not personal vindication. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by a reluctant compliance to law, a muted recognition that consequences exist even when they refuse to. I didn't revel in their downfall. I watched as a quiet witness, understanding that justice had a pace and form of its own, and my role was to survive, to exist, to reclaim space for myself. The mornings were my own now. I journaled with deliberate care, documenting the sensations of wind, salt, sand, and the small gestures of nature that reflected resilience and life's persistence. Each word was a claim. I existed beyond fear, beyond grief, beyond betrayal. Each line was a declaration of autonomy, a map of recovery, a reminder that peace is crafted, not stumbled upon. I cultivated the garden slowly, turning soil, planting seeds, pruning roses, attending to each plant as if tending my own recovery in parallel. The earth responded to care and patience, offering growth, blossoms, and renewal. I learned that attention, applied consistently, heals more than it punishes. The cottage, with its creaking floors and sun-bleached walls, became a sanctuary. Its quiet was not oppressive. It had pulse and rhythm. The wind through the open windows whispered secrets of endurance and constancy, grounding me in a life that had become my own. At night, I walked along the shoreline, letting the waves lap at my feet, feeling the sand compress and release under me. Each movement was a meditation in motion, a quiet affirmation that I had returned to myself. Memories of the lake, of being submerged, of crawling from water and fear, no longer haunted me. They existed as reminders of strength, survival, and the capacity to endure what once seemed unbearable. I cooked simple meals with intention, arranging plates as if each meal was a celebration of autonomy and care. The aroma of bread or tea seemed to carry a message. You have the right to nurture yourself, to savor existence without obligation or guilt. Lillian became a part of my life in small ways. She would bring groceries or sit in companionable silence, her presence a reminder that connection can be gentle, supportive, and affirming without demanding surrender. We laughed softly sometimes, shared small observations, and existed together without need or pretense. The legal landscape continued to evolve. Daniel provided updates, but his calls were no longer urgent. He had trusted that my safety was established, that my footing was secure. I absorbed the updates as part of the world moving around me, not as storms threatening to destabilize my peace. I realized that true safety is less about walls or laws and more about knowing your own strength and boundaries. I explored the village gradually, walking streets lined with small shops and homes that seemed unhurried. I observed the cadence of everyday life, the soft chatter of neighbors, the patterns of birds and weather. I felt present, grounded, and wholly part of a living landscape, not a passive observer of its cruelties. I slept deeply, nights stretching long and unbroken. Dreams were simple and comforting, filled with images of light, open water, and wind. Fear had no place in this rest. The body remembered tension and trauma, but it also remembered the relief of having endured and prevailed. I carried that memory like a talisman, a proof of resilience, a physical reminder that I had survived the unspeakable and emerged intact. The sun rose over cliffs and tides with a slow, steady rhythm, and I allowed myself to marvel at each dawn, each subtle color shift, each intricate detail that life offered when not clouded by fear or anxiety. I allowed gratitude to fill the spaces once occupied by dread. I could exist in comfort, in simplicity, in quiet observation. I could watch the world move and not flinch. My life became deliberate, every action intentional, every thought a choice. I moved through my home and garden, along the beach and cliffs with measured care and awareness. I did not hurry. I did not cling. I simply existed, fully, consciously, and beautifully. The presence of water became a constant teacher. Waves curling, retreating, and surging reminded me of continuity, impermanence, and the inevitability of motion. I listened to its stories, its rhythm, and felt mirrored in its constancy, resilient, enduring, self-contained. Even as Grant, Milo, and Wendy navigated the consequences of their actions, I felt removed from resentment or need for vindication. My satisfaction was in existence, autonomy, and peace. I had survived betrayal and fear. I had reclaimed space for myself. I had transformed quiet into sanctuary, isolation into self-possession, and fear into clarity. I existed in deliberate alignment with my values, my peace, and my life. Each day confirmed a truth. Freedom is claimed not through the fall of others, but through the conscious assertion of self, through courage, patience, and the acceptance of what is and what will be. I watched sunsets bleed across the sky, reflected on sand and water, and let a gentle clarity settle into my mind, into my bones, into the rhythm of my heart. I understood finally that I had been given more than survival. I had been given the ability to live on my terms, to embrace autonomy, and to find joy in deliberate, quiet existence. The ocean, the cliffs, the garden, the cottage, and my own body all whispered the same truth. You are enough. You are whole. You are deserving. And in that truth, I thrived, fully and without reservation. I woke to the sound of gulls and the gentle lap of waves against the shore, a sound that had once been background to fear and tension, now became a hymn of liberation. The cottage smelled faintly of pine and salt, the air crisp and honest, carrying nothing but the rhythm of life. I made tea, savoring the heat as it seeped into my hands and chest, feeling a calm I hadn't known existed in decades. My eyes traced the line of the horizon, where water met sky, and in that vast, uninterrupted space, I understood the extent of what I had claimed, not through confrontation, not through revenge, but through survival, clarity, and the courage to exist fully. Memories of the lake, of being submerged, of crawling to shore alone, no longer held terror. They were markers of the strength I'd uncovered, proof that I had faced impossibility and emerged intact. Each morning became a ritual. Tea, the ocean, slow movement through the cottage and garden, and quiet reflection on what I had endured. I relished the deliberate packing, the freedom to choose each moment, and the absence of fear like a gift I had earned. Wendy continued to visit, timid, seeking neither forgiveness nor approval, but simply presence. I welcomed her cautiously, allowing honesty and observation to guide our interactions. The silence between us was no longer a wound, but a canvas. Sometimes she spoke in fragments, sometimes she did not speak at all. I offered no judgment, only steadiness, letting her rediscover herself in my quiet acceptance. Legal matters dwindled. Daniel's calls became informational, calm, and spaced, reflecting the finality of what had begun with panic and uncertainty. I no longer lived in the shadow of their actions. I existed independently of their consequences. Grant and Milo were distant storms now, the repercussions of their arrogance unfolding without my attention or intervention. Their lessons had been administered by life itself, and I observed from the calm of my reclaimed world. I explored further along the coastline, discovering coves and cliffs, the textures of rocks, sand, and surf teaching me patience, resilience, and the intimate poetry of endurance. Each journey, each observation, reinforced the quiet truth that life could be both tender and relentless, both beautiful and honest. The nights were long and uninterrupted, sleep stretching deep and restorative. Dreams, once restless with fear and grief, now unfolded in light, wind, and water. I felt the rhythm of my body, the pulse of my heart, and the steady strength of a mind reclaimed. I walked barefoot along the sand, letting the ocean slide over my feet, each retreating wave a metaphor for letting go, each surge a reminder of continuity. I realized that control and peace exist not by manipulating the world, but by asserting your own presence within it. The cottage became a sanctuary of intentional living. I unpacked carefully, surrounding myself with objects that mattered: my teapot, the quilt, photographs of my husband, and a few books that had survived the years with me. Each item held history, yes, but history that supported, not confined me. I cooked, arranged, cleaned, and cared for this space with deliberate attention, experiencing joy in the ordinary acts of maintenance and presence. Lillian continued her gentle support, bringing groceries, sharing quiet moments, laughing softly at small observations. Her presence was a reminder that connection could exist without intrusion, that friendship and love could be gentle, unassuming, and affirming. I often sat on the porch at dusk, watching the sky blush and deepen, listening to the waves and letting the wind carry away lingering fragments of fear or grief. The horizon became a teacher, infinite, patient, and ever-present, reminding me that life's edges were vast, and my place within them was secure. I reflected on every version of myself: wife, mother, caretaker, forgiver, survivor, and now, simply a woman claiming her space, her autonomy, and her quiet dignity. I no longer needed the approval of others or the validation of justice to feel whole. The lake had once threatened to claim my life. The people around me had threatened to suppress it, but I had emerged with more than breath. I had emerged with clarity, peace, and purpose. The sound of the ocean became my companion, a constant teacher of patience, endurance, and honest presence. Each morning, each sip of tea, each step on sand or porch board was a claim. I existed fully, unafraid, and grounded in truth. I had chosen myself, and in that choice found liberation. Fear no longer dictated movement. Silence no longer pressed on me as a weight. Betrayal no longer left residue. The world existed around me, but I moved through it deliberately, with autonomy, intention, and the soft power of regained self-possession. I understood that life, in its quiet persistence, was both fragile and resilient, and that my own life, reclaimed and nurtured, was a testament to endurance. Each sunset, each tide, each breeze reinforced the same truth. I was enough, I was safe, I was deserving of peace. I carried no vengeance, no need for recognition. My victories were silent, intimate, and absolute. I could sit with the waves, watch gulls trace circles above the water, and breathe fully without interruption. The future was no longer a threat. It was an open canvas, waiting for deliberate strokes of intention and presence. I had survived, I had reclaimed, I had rebuilt, and now I could simply exist, fully and freely, in the space I had earned. Before returning inside, I whispered once into the wind to myself, to the universe. I choose myself. Always, no matter how late. And in that choice, the weight lifted, the horizon glowed, and I understood that life, in all its raw honesty and beauty, belonged entirely to me, and I to it.